It was the closest the world has ever come to nuclear war, a confrontation between the United States, the Soviet Union, and Cuba, known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. The year, 1962, the month, October, the main event for that year. Often regarded as the most dangerous juncture of the nuclear age, the Cuban Missile Crisis was a culmination of Cold War tensions that had been escalating for some time due to the Soviet Union stationing nuclear missiles in Cuba. The fate of the world rested on the ability of two men, President John F. Kennedy and Premier Nikita Khrushchev, to reach a compromise. In October 1962, US intelligence discovered the Soviets had installed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of the United States. Cuban leader Fidel Castro had allowed the USSR to set up the nuclear missiles for the defense of his country. When questioned, the Soviets publicly stated that they had no need to install nuclear weapons outside the USSR. Khrushchev had promised military assistance to the besieged Castro regime in Cuba. He saw the Soviet Union's relationship with Cuba as representing a unique opportunity to offset the threat posed to Moscow by American nuclear missiles based in Turkey. When President Kennedy learned of the missile sites through reconnaissance photographs, despite the USSR's denials, he immediately organized the ExComm, Executive Committee of the National Security Council, a group of his most trusted advisors to handle the crisis. The committee did not believe that the missiles were completely ready at the time they first saw the pictures, but they guessed that it would only be a matter of weeks. The ExComm gave Kennedy four options. He could do nothing, use quiet diplomacy and not publicize the presence of the missiles, take the weapons out with an airstrike, or impose a naval blockade against Cuba. Kennedy demanded that the missiles be withdrawn and proceeded to impose a naval quarantine around Cuba to prevent the arrival of more Soviet weapons. On October the 23rd, President Kennedy signed Proclamation 3504, formally declaring the blockade of Cuban seaports. The blockade would take effect early the next day. With America's overwhelming naval superiority, Premier Khrushchev ordered Soviet ships not to challenge the blockade. The blockade was implemented, and negotiations began between Kennedy and Khrushchev. Kennedy demanded that Khrushchev dismantle and remove all missiles from Cuba. For days, the two superpowers considered their options, while Jack Kennedy addressed his nation, announcing the discovery of the missiles. While an outcome was being debated, American troops were amassed at Guantanamo Bay on Cuba's eastern end, and all non-essential personnel were evacuated. The American Naval Air Station was then reinforced with Marines, should there be an attack. On October the 28th, a message from the Soviet Premier was broadcast on Radio Moscow. The USSR proposed agreeing to remove the missiles in return for a commitment from the US to withdraw its own missiles from Turkey and never to invade Cuba. After much deliberation between the Soviet Union and Kennedy's cabinet, it was agreed. The missiles were withdrawn from Cuba weeks later, and America agreed to remove their weapons from Turkey. It lasted just 13 terrifying days, but the Cuban Missile Crisis was a unique moment in history that had very nearly brought the world to nuclear war.